Hi folks. I didn't do very well in getting my slides entirely together. This blank slide represents the slide where I wanted to talk about who I am and where I'm from. It's very brief. My name's Tom Apperley. I have been working in Finland for the last 3 years, and before that I was working and living in Australia, and before that New Zealand. It's important to note that these 3 countries all have indigenous people. They're all former colonies where indigenous people have been excluded from various parts of the regime, government, future of the nations. And I've been nurtured in those lands, and I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous people of those countries and their role in nurturing me, and pay my respects to indigenous leaders past and present who may or may not be here today. Someone can tell me later about Sweden, and hopefully I'll find a bit more out about the situation here. So I've got this written down to remember to say it. Right. I'm a white person. I refer to myself in my mind as a Pākehā. That's what people who live in New Zealand who are white, European settlers, often call themselves. I'm a straight heterosexual male. I was born a male and I present as a male. So I guess that might have been obvious, but it's maybe important to point that out. This was my mind over the last couple of days, trying to put things together about this topic that I'm working on that tries to connect sex work and game work. And I kind of sometimes feel like when I'm working on it, I see too much stuff, maybe stuff that isn't there. But what I'm trying to do today is put forward the contemporary connection, which has been exacerbated and intensified by COVID. To look at these live streaming platforms, which rest very parallel in how they appear, how they look, and even the clientele of labourers that bring them to life, that monetize their bodies and their labour through these platforms and profit share with them. Now, talking about sex workers is maybe difficult for me, because I feel like when I'm saying that word, some of the people that I'm talking about wouldn't like to be referred to in that way, even though it's like the least pejorative word positive to describe the kind of work. But I'll persevere and try to own it. As for game working, there's a lot of different kinds of game work. And probably you think about them and discuss them all the time. But there's also a kind of game work that's been systemically gigified and become part of a kind of gig economy based around live streaming, where there's a lot of people involved and maybe only a few of them become significant in our perceptions, but there's many other people who are doing the same or similar things with much less success. So, what I want to try to do today is to contrast this kind of intense moment of recognition that there's a real close similarity between online sex work and live streaming, and to kind of contextualize it against what I see as key moments in gaming history where women's labour, in particular, is recruited and then disposed of. So I'm going to start with this moment. Probably everyone sort of knows who that figure is. This is an official press kit image from Tomb Raider 2. That individual is Lara Croft. This is presented in the press kit as a kind of pin-up poster that people can choose to print in their magazines or use as a desktop in various ways. Now, I think it was 1996 that the first Tomb Raider came out, and it's not really a game that seems that memorable to me right now. But it was one of those games that kind of came out of nowhere, sold 7 million units really quickly, and made the company extremely prominent, almost overnight, over a matter of months. And it precipitated many kind of strategies where woman lead characters were introduced into games over the next 5 or 6 years. Become a kind of almost standard practice. Now, this created some kind of opportunities for women to work in the games industry or in game adjacent kind of industries, if we were willing to include promotional labour as a part of games labour. And they were doing such tasks as motion capture, voice, character modelling, full motion video acting. They were also appearing in print and television and other media advertisements, and they were also appearing in costume as those characters in live events. So they were recruited in a number of ways, but mainly through modelling agencies. Now, Lara Croft, this character by Core, was very much a controlled piece of IP. And there was a lot of theorization of her relationship to real women at the time, including a really great book by Astrid Duber-Mankowski, who's a German-based scholar who published a book on Lara Croft in 2001. It was translated into English and published by the University of Minnesota Press in 2005. It's a really nice book. It's about 80 pages long. You can read it in about an hour and a half. Well, I can. It's not a competition. So, in this book, she introduces a really nice concept that she calls body sampling. And she describes this as a kind of strategy of ownership, of corporate ownership of women's bodies. by using this kind of voice actor here, model there, mocap actor here, to produce one actual character and image for people. There wasn't one particular person that they had to rely on for a relationship. These women became practically interchangeable. And if you know, it's probably, I shouldn't say if you remember, but Lara Croft was famously portrayed by one model per year during the course of, say, 1997 to 2005. And I don't want to go into that too much because, I mean, it's fascinating, but I need to get on to the next thing. So here's another example of a game that would have previously, excluded women completely, but decided that it was a good idea to produce this character, schoolgirl, etc., that's a rollerblader, and she's presented as a playable character alongside all these various professionals and becomes the basis of this kind of connecting promotional strategy across multiple platforms, including live platforms. So this is one of the, I guess, more celebrity-oriented people that worked in that area. It's a person called Kerry Hoskins. She did motion capture for sprite models for Mortal Kombat in a number of games and appeared in a bunch of other games as well, and was kind of like a poster girl in games magazines. Here she is in a magazine called Flux from 1996. Now, it was very common for game magazines in this decade and even into the following decade to have some kind of section where sexualized images of woman characters from games might be presented, or kind of celebrity woman that had portrayed characters in different forms of advertisement or promotion would appear to promote and remind everyone about how awesome the game is. Everyone, right? Has a pretty kind of narrow idea about who wants to play games and so on. But these practices were so prevalent in the industry at the time that they were even used to promote graphics cards. Does anyone remember this at all? Yeah, horrible, crazy stuff. But basically, there was a character, this is called Agent Ruby, this character. She's a spy who does spy things with secret agents and helicopters kind of stuff. But she also appears on the box of the component that you used to put into your tower PC, and on the component itself, so that you could look through your clear plastic or slightly neon plastic side and see her there. She was a character that was from what's called tech demos. So the company that made this ATI would produce tech demos which were live rendered animations that could only really be played on these new graphics cards that they had that showed how great they were. Now, it's not just ATI that was doing this, there was all of the major graphics cards companies were doing it at this point. Had woman mascot characters that they used to promote the cards across multiple platforms and in game trade shows as well, technology trade shows. Does anyone want to guess what this woman is promoting? It's the Xbox. Can you see the X that she's got on her belly button? This is a for real thing that happened, right? So Microsoft did not have an Xbox to show at the 2000 E3. So they asked her to dress as a character in a game that never got released, was never more than a demo, called I can't remember what it's called, but she controls giant robots and does awesome things in those giant robots, apparently. But this game was cancelled and never released, and I think that the X is kind of just extra, so you know it's Xbox. So this is like Microsoft behaving itself as it wanted to at the most important trade show at the time. This kind of stuff was everywhere. And I was having a conversation last night with some people that were pretty drunk back at the hotel about kind of, 20 years ago, people knew better about things. We're talking about jackass, ass, and I guess like maybe some people might be thinking, yeah, they didn't know better. They totally knew better. This is just a kind of easy choice to make for what they thought was their target audience, what they thought was important, the important gamers. A point I wish to underscore is that at this point in gaming history, women suddenly became considered vital to the sector's well-being, while also being undervalued and under-acknowledged. Like, no one knows who that person is on the internet. Like, there's very little documentation of who these people are, who were in these roles, doing the body sampling for these characters, which was so important to the industry at the time. Their role was to embody and animate these games and technologies to make them feel real and palpable to people, certain kinds of people. Now, in the case of right now, this kind of contemporary intersection of sex work and game work that we find in streaming platforms, there's a great deal of work and different kinds of labor involved. But their task is remarkably similar. It's to kind of make games seem more alive, more intimate, show people that they're interesting, that they provoke emotions, that they provoke bodily responses. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of labor involved. This kind of labor of generating a kind of effect, like a feeling, a connection between this streamer and a nebulous audience that's just a kind of number ticking away on their control, in their interface. Then there's aesthetic labor, which is I never really perform any aesthetic labor. Like I look like this kind of all the time. Sometimes I get my beard and hair cut. But other people have to spend, or feel like they have to spend, a lot of time presenting themselves. And the kind of work that goes into presenting yourself in a live stream as a game worker is considerable, especially if you're doing some kind of cosplay or other kind of special outfit. There's also a massive amount of behind-the-scenes labor, which is maybe a bit... There's a lot of different parts to it, but there's kind of setting up studios, taking them down, but also tasks involved with post-production, editing, and so on, because people often also make films of themselves while they're streaming or camming to sort of double monetize content. Then there's a kind of labor of maintaining your social media and the potential of having to migrate somewhere different. A lot of this labor is really aspirational, like in the sense that, as I mentioned before, there's a few people that are prominent on the site, that when you go to chat or whatever, let's talk, or that you see a few people that the platform's telling you are interesting, but there's many, many other people that are far down that list that don't have such a kind of strong relationship with the platform because the platform hasn't yet made a massive profit from them. And this labor is somewhat precarious. This labor and presentation often involves really interesting engagements with material cultures of gaming and kind of creativity that's really interesting and kind of shows me, for example, a really interesting way of conveying one's affective relationship to gaming and games, like through dress and so on. While Womangame streamers, Womangame streamers are often kind of conflated with sex workers, primarily because they're seen by some people as asking people for money on the internet and engaging in manipulative behavior with the people who are following them by promising them things that they're never going to receive. There's even a word that's thrown around for this called simping. Has anyone heard of this word? Yeah. Now, some streamers hate this word so much that they actually will kick people out for using it in their stream, like it's a form of abuse. But other people kind of adopt and feel empowered by this word, like they're going to, well, this concept, like they're going to create a simp army and destroy capitalism kind of thing. So it's a kind of point at which there's a kind of emergence of a notion of woman in games culture being self-serving, femme fatale types. That they're there for their own enrichment and that they're preying on these poor, nice, meek gaming chaps. Oh, I'm glad someone laughed. And this has kind of been a constant point of criticism about women's engagement in the promotional cultures of games historically. That this is so manipulative. How are these poor guys going to be able to choose the right game to play if you're going to show them advertisements like this? You're ruining game culture, you're ruining it with your presence. So this really kind of anti-woman vibe that okay, so I'm going to move now to one of these other historical kind of moments and connections where a sense of manipulation and destruction of proper attention and accounting for what is right and not right became a kind of massive controversy in gaming culture. I'm going to talk about these shows a little bit more that were called E3 or Entertainment something Expo. No, I can't remember what the other E was. Now these shows started in the middle of the 90s, and I think that they may even continue now. But now they're much less relevant because you kind of don't need this big intense point of information to find out stuff about what's going to happen in gaming for the next year or so. I don't really know what they're for anymore. But back here in the early day of the internet, in the middle of the 90s, these were like kind of events with a great deal of mystique, and people were very excited by them because there were all of these revolutionary new technologies coming out and transforming everything, like PlayStation 2, for example. A really big deal at the time. So here, this is a person called Rona Mitra. She's the first long-term contract Lara Croft continuous performer. She had a 100-day contract in 1997. She was fired because she actually claimed that she really was Lara in an interview. And this is one of the points that Duba Melkowski brings up in kind of this attempt to create the body-sampled woman, was that this person disrupted that by trying to claim that she was the character itself. Now, on your right there, you can see, sorry, left, you can see this picture of her riding a motorbike in front of a bunch of TV screens. Well, I guess sitting on it maybe is more accurate. Now, this is a shot from the kind of floor show of E3 1997. And it's this hyper-mediated event with lots of screens. I guess that was how things were supposed to be made to look cool back then. There's heaps of press there. She's got this huge Harley Davidson. Apparently the crowds were like 200 people deep to see this show that year. In 1997, the show was in some convention hall in Atlanta, Georgia. And the British people that came to bring this game display to E3 actually recruited a bunch of models in the UK to bring with them. I guess that, I don't know if anyone remembers that kind of briefly in the middle of the 90s, the UK was cool. No? Yeah. At least they thought they were. So here is one of the most extreme controversies that took place. It took me like maybe a week to find this footage. It's pretty buried because even at the time, you know, the people that were there thought it was pretty shocking and ridiculous. I share it with you for historic purposes so that you know that that's the kind of thing that Nokia would do if it felt like it. Right? So I'm working with colleagues in Finland about putting an exhibition together about the history of the Engage, which is, you know, a failed gaming console from 2003 or something like that. But they were there to promote this. For context, John Romero and Stevie Case have just walked off the stage. They were pitching their awesome mobile game that they were going to have on the Engage. And then this person skated onto the stage on a skateboard, hopped off, and revealed the price for the new console. People were also upset about the price. But also. So here's the kind of presentation that promotional laborers were giving games in the early 2000s. Now, I mean, on the left there, right, sorry, left, you're right. That's probably a pretty exceptional case because that's, they're promoting this Playbour the Mansion game that was supposed to be some kind of amazing simulator in 2004. But, you know, fortunately it was terrible and it kind of sank into deep obscurity. But, you know, interesting in some ways. This other picture on the left is to promote Prince of Persia 2. And this person is someone who was involved in professional wrestling in the United States. That was also an area where women were recruited from for this kind of event. Professional wrestling and daytime talk shows. The US has a lot of daytime short talk shows where women kind of about prizes, and that kind of micro-celebrity for people who stay at home and watch TV all day. And one of the things that they did was also work at E3. So at around about this time, 2005, there started to be a distinction made between promotional workers that were interactive displays and promotional workers who were demonstrators. So interactive displays were kind of just in costume and doing things to kind of attract people to the booth. Like on the left, you can see a group of women promotional laborers promoting a game called Singles 2. There was a second one. Yeah. So on the right, I don't know if any very patriotic people can tell me anything about this picture. It doesn't have a little part of it that fills you with pride, because it's the Swedish game console, the Gizmondo. Okay, so now you're embarrassed for your country. I get it. So this is a really fascinating console. One of the ones which I'm really fascinated by. It is like Nokia's Engage. It comes from a really weird direction into people really being experimental about commodifying mobile gaming. So, you know, obviously Nokia's coming from the mobile phone kind of direction. But these guys, the Gizmondo people, they were making, you know, those things that people used to stick in their car, like stick on their dashboard, and it would tell you, like, and have a map and stuff like that. Like, what are those things called? I can't remember. Yeah, navigation systems. What a really neat, precise name. No wonder I can't remember it. So they were making navigation systems, and they decided, like, well, we're going to now make mobile games. Have a bit of research about some of the games that were made for it sometime. The games that seem really crazy, like Lawnmower Boy or Sticky Balls or something like that. Now, Gizmondo got some insane amount of funding. If you read the story like about it, it's like kind of huge write-ups in Vice and stuff like that, because people were claiming it was partially funded by the Swedish mafia, you know, or venture capital and all kinds of stuff. They had so much money. What did they do with their money? One of the things they did with their money is they bought a modeling agency. They bought a modeling agency so it would be easy for them to recruit promotional laborers wherever they went. They'd fly them around the world. These three people are they're in Los Angeles, and they're from a modeling agency in London, owned by Gizmondo. By 2006, the scrutiny of women's bodies is really intense. They are no longer allowed really to show skin at all. You can see the people in the center. They are doing that because Sony didn't care about paying the fine that they had to pay for each of the people that, you know, presented their bodies that way. Interesting aside, the woman in the purple won a huge internet contest to play that character at E3. Very elaborate, with a kind of finals in Las Vegas, etc. And she was chosen because she also played EverQuest 2, as well as any other qualities which they might have seen relevant. On the left, another strategy was to dress in very tight PVC style clothing. And on the right, you can see some women that are protesting the ban on, or the regulations on what people could wear. And it turns out that it's not really a protest, it's actually an advertisement for the after party for the E3 participants. But it's kind of presented as this protest. Now, this was kind of the last year in the early days of E3 that women promotional laborers were kind of deployed this way. Like, after this year, it became, from 2007 for a couple of years, it became like a kind of industry-only affair, and this kind of behavior wasn't allowed anymore, because people in the industry believed that it started to detract from the event itself. The uses of promotional models at E3 indicates there were some very problematic practices in relation to them. It seems for some sectors of the gaming industry, E3 was an opportunity to occupy space and gain attention for their brand through the deployment of women's bodies. When the problems arose, the show resorted to scrutinizing women intensely, fining them, but the companies paid for it, and eventually curtailing the involvement of promotional workers at E3. For most women, let's say this was just the end of a reasonably well-paid annual gig. It's probably not a big deal. But for others, it's loss of opportunity to cultivate cultures of fandom that were emerging around these workers. So I guess like this maybe only MySpace existed at this time, but there's a kind of proto-influencer, pre-social media kind of vibe, where people become interested and fans of various promotional workers that consistently appeared in E3. And the games media industry started to try to monetize this by interviewing promotional workers, doing photo shoots with them, and putting it in paywalled content in their online journals, online magazines. So this is at a point like around about start of the 2000s where still print is pretty okay, doing well, but they're starting to emerge like really big online players in the games media space. And so here I'm talking about IGN. Does anyone ever look at IGN? It's kind of pretty interesting spot. Has some good walkthroughs, I've heard. But it's removed all content that's to do with this kind of behavior. Like it's just a blank article now. I can find some of it using Wayback Machine, where they have like detailed interviews with promotional laborers from E3 and other game shows. But there's a kind of attempt to delete and remove this content from their site because they're kind of, I guess their vibe is totally different now. Okay, so in contemporary gaming platforms, there's also this kind of very intense scrutiny on women's bodies. There's a kind of attempt to control how they present themselves, how they clothe themselves, etc. But there's very big players on Twitch that kind of redefine some of the rules, and probably everyone's pretty bored by Amaranth by now, and I don't want to show those images for too long, so that's enough of that. She is basically a kind of key player in that space and is able to do things which other people aren't really allowed to do in terms of monetization, because she's, I guess, almost untouchable because of how much wealth she generates. But it's very interesting to see kind of, I mean, I wouldn't really describe her actions as transgressive because I think that Twitch kind of welcomes them, but she's really pushing to find what's the limit of what you're allowed to do on that platform in terms of this kind of sexually provocative content. I mean, a lot of people have told me that ASMR is not sexual, but I think that no one believes when Amaranth says that. Not sure. But what's really impressive is that she can lick and suck a microphone for like 12 hours, kind of more or less without stopping. She goes on kind of crazy marathon binges. So I guess that people kind of can't help but check it out. It gets a lot of views, that's for sure. So most live streamers operating in that kind of space have nowhere near the amount of attention that Amaranth has, but are still able to successfully, monetize their presence. And this is because it kind of is situated in an ecology where the streaming content leads people to other content, which is monetized in a way that gives more profit to the person who's made the content, rather than sharing it with Twitch or just these kind of small amounts that are subscriptions. Now, parallel to this kind of emergence of, I guess, like very provocative content that's kind of at the limit of what Twitch seems to want to allow. Remembering that, they're criticizing people for showing that they have a gap between their breasts, for example, or that they, have bodies at all, really. There emerges these platforms which actually seem to be catering for this kind of content. And these, all 3 or 4 of them, kind of came out just prior to COVID during 2018, but really took off, if we can say they took off, because I think that they've all failed now. They all kind of became significant and became interesting to people in this period. Like, for example, Nude Gamer was covered by Vice, as they proudly say on their site. Of course, Vice was saying, what the fuck is this? But still, like, I guess somehow that seems to legitimize it to them. Other platforms were Plexstorm, this purple one. Plexstorm is kind of interesting in the sense that a lot of people were using it to create sexy role-playing, like RPG content. So like, I guess, table-topless role-playing. Yeah, not my term. And then more serious camming, sex worker type sites were also rebranding as playful and including categories around like live streaming video games that could be part of a performance, a camera's performance. So this kind of consistency around gaming and the idea of being a woman who streams, somehow being involved in creating this kind of content became very suggestive to some people and kind of reaffirmed the existing attitudes of the platform, which were built around not showing sexual content, or only in ways which they permitted, I suppose is more like it. So, jumping back into the past, what's the time? Have I been talking for too long? Yes. Yes, Tom, I have. What's the time?
11:30. You started late, so it's fine.
It's fine? Thanks, Ulf. Okay, okay. So, these... How can I talk about this? Okay, so when I started to do my research about these events, I started to search for pictures of these events to try to understand what they were like. And there's very, very many pictures which are kind of super mundane, game-related stuff. And there's a kind of subset of pictures which are about kind of having your photo taken with a promotional worker. This particular picture is of interest because it kind of shows like a remarkable constitution of people. Constitution? I'll leave it. But basically, we've got here on the left and here on the right two people, Lisa Boyle and Patricia Ford. Now, these people are sort of like, I guess, like early internet it girls. They were people that were entrepreneurial about sex work, and they didn't want to have to ask anyone if they could sell people content. So they created their own websites and sold their own content, and they worked with other sex workers to produce content from them that they also sold on their sites and so on. So these are kind of, I guess, early adopters of internet porn. And here they are at some kind of obscure trade show. These characters that they're portraying is in some kind of failed game that Eidos made right after it made Tomb Raider 2. It's called something like, can't even remember what it's called, but no one knows. I could probably find it, but no one recognizes these characters. This game, it's just gone. It sold nothing. It disappeared. But they were there to promote it. So why were they randomly there to promote it? I don't think so. I think that Eidos, who I already described how they had recruited a bunch of promotional labourers in the UK the year before to bring them to Georgia. The following year, they'd recruited women from the USA who also happened to be kind of, have a kind of niche celebrity with certain people who would know about internet porn. So I don't know if this guy knows it or not, no idea. But a lot of people did, and they were like taking photographs like, hey, look at me with these porn stars, right? So there's a kind of meta game going on with the attendance of these conferences, these trade shows, where they're wandering around tracking down people that they recognize from the internet and taking photographs with them. This guy is, I mean, he's like a kind of maybe sort of journalist, a guy who could get in the show because he had his own site that was kind of influential at the time. And he went straight there to this person, Diana Kaufman, to have his photograph taken with her, and posted about it on his Flickr account, saying like, yeah, look at this photo of me with Diana Kaufman. The future of video gaming, it says behind them. Lucky it wasn't. So What I want to suggest is this kind of meta game where people search and look to try to find sex workers is still going on. So here's a crowdsourcing site called Thought Hub. It's, thank goodness, out of business, but many more have, taken its place, where people post footage of streamers that find leaked paywalled content and post it there, try to out them as sex workers, tightly scrutinize all of their content to see if they can find these kind of upskirts, cleavage shots, nip slips, etc., so that they can place them on this site. So the level of scrutiny that woman streamers go through can be extremely intense and quite perverse. At the same time, there's no kind of easy way to hide oneself if one's a streamer, whether that's a sex worker or a game streamer. Like, you need to exist in a kind of multi-platform kind of way. Like, you can't just have Instagram, you've got to have LinkedIn as well, kind of thing. Except lists this long are often quite common. People know this kind of site. It's called I think, internet landing page or something like that. There's like 2 or 3 really common ones. Who's got one of these? Yeah, they're really useful. I've got one too. I haven't updated for years, but this is kind of a response to Instagram only giving you one link on your profile. So people would link to this and be able to put all of their content and stuff in a big list. There's even ways of hiding links to adult stuff if you want to, on some of them. And there's some kind of huge amount of these in development at the moment too. They're kind of like a go-to software for young entrepreneurs to try to develop. Seen as being needed. And then there's this kind of super importance of posting a schedule. If you're a game worker or a sex worker, people need to know when they're going to find you doing a live show. This person has a very elaborate online existence. I had to cut off Thursday, because there was a picture of her just beneath it. But don't worry, it's exactly the same as Wednesday. There's no day off there, just one day off. So that's a pretty intense schedule when you think about all of the behind-the-scenes labor and kind of unpacking and unwinding that might have to take place afterwards. But it's quite a diverse schedule. Like, there's kind of Dungeons & Dragons, Age of Empires, Fallout 4, and King's Quest. So the Dungeons & Dragons one is probably a joint stream with a bunch of other people that are in sex work, where they're kind of like trying to get or share subscribers between each other. But the place that's really become a refuge for sex workers and games workers that want to get away from this kind of behavior has been Discord. And Discord has been really praised by a lot of people for allowing a kind of diversity of content and having quite good rules about pseudo-anonymity and privacy and prioritizing safety and so on. But this kind of multi-platform existence and these schedules, they're a response to the constant threat of being deplatformized and having to migrate content from one platform to another. This is, for some people, a point of constant exhaustion and fear that they'll have to wake up in the morning and suddenly migrate all their content to one place or another. I don't know if anyone remembers when OnlyFans was going to shut down having adult content. Instantly other sites appeared where you could transfer all of your OnlyFans content to their platform with just one press of a button. That was their promise, and that kind of threat sort of periodically emerges and re-emerges. So now we're at the point where I had to hitchhike here this morning, and I guess what I want to conclude by saying is that misogyny in game cultures is also shaped by anti-sex worker sentiment. Well, I don't know exactly what to call it, but yeah, that's what I'm going for right now. When women workers were recruited to gaming to actively embody and animate game characters and technologies through body sampling and in even more everyday ways like effective engagement on trade show floors, they became part of a multiplayer metagame which sought to identify them and attach them to other available content. This is now labour, which is live streaming game workers and sex workers are expected to perform themselves, while the metagame has pivoted towards outing people as sex workers and stealing their content, creating additional layers of scrutiny and surveillance above and beyond what is already experienced in gay live streaming on Twitch. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Tom. Let's see if we have questions. I have one to start off with. So you've shown the history of this sort of exploitation of women and women's bodies and how they are invited and really getting produced and in horrible ways commodified, and how that's keeping going on. You mentioned the long tail of Twitch and the sort of attempts to make things work that is motivated by poverty and economic pressure, and then at the same time this sort of marginalization and tabooization of their work, that they then get invited, get exploited, do all the emotional labor to feel heterosexual men, make them feel comfortable like it's a social space. This is always going to be there in that sense. I think my question is how can we make a contribution to that the medium that we design and love doesn't become a place that is so cold and so abusive that it has a market for people to pay for somebody to play their stupid game with them, right? That they need to buy a mercy to hang on behind them and heal them because it isn't already nice and giving. And B, how can we make sure that that also means that we can exclude women as something else than just the people who make this place a nice place in the first place?
Thank you for your question, Patrick. That was a really amazing question. I felt like I'd been heard, which was nice. I also felt like you asked me to say something I hadn't really thought about that much, which is what can we do about it? Because I'm a bit of a fatalist and that's not good. For example, maybe we could consider how we can support platforms which do offer refuge to people. How well are we working with things like Discord right now? Are we subscribing to them, or are we subscribing to, Netflix and Steam and all of that kind of stuff?
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Lunchtime is coming around, and I can hear some tummies grumbling. Tom, you're going to be around for a little bit, so I think if there's anybody else who would like to ask a question, but thank you so much for your talk.
I forgot to say something that was really important. Sorry, just 1 minute.
Do it.
There's this rumor been going around that I'm cool, and it's not true. Yeah. I'm a big nerd.
Yeah, I beg to differ. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.